A very warm welcome to you. This is Happy Times and Places, in which I, Toby Hadoke, watch an episode of Doctor Who, commentating along, dropping in facts and observations, and trying to guess what my special guest's favourite things about this particular instalment are.
Hello Toby, it's me, David J Howe here. Now, you may know me as a writer, as a researcher, as a publisher of all things connected with Doctor Who. But today I'm here to talk to you about one of my favourite stories, and it's The Mind Robber.
Well, welcome everybody. It's time to venture once again into the land of fiction as the second Doctor, Patrick Troughton, and his companions Jamie and Zoe wrangle with characters who are made up and don't exist in the real world, which of course they in real life don't do either. But isn't that a wonderful notion? I'm enthused because I've just been talking to Stephen Szupanski from Radio Free Skaro about Quatermass, about which I rabbit on quite a lot, as has been noted. And it's enthused me to get back to talking about something I like rabbiting on about even more, which is Doctor Who. Now, that Radio Free Skaro podcast, if you are a patron, will be out in the future. It will be out on Sunday. If you are a non-patron, it's long in the past, probably about 6 months ago. And that's pretty much the only difference between patronage and not, is the wait between episodes. But actually, there are advantages to being a non-patron in this regard, because patrons have had to wait quite a long time between episodes 3 and 4 of The Mind Robber, because I've been swanning about doing things, and non-patrons, because your stuff is released to a sensible schedule where things are all grouped together because they're all well in the can, whereas patrons get these sort of as they're done, really. I mean, it's almost live, this, my goodness. I mean, it's actually due out as I'm recording this. It should be going up on the Patreon feed now. It's obviously not going to because it doesn't exist yet. I deny its reality. It's currently a cardboard cutout of itself. So non-patrons, you will hear this episode 4 of The Mind Robber, just a short number of days after you've heard episode 3, as the schedule goes. I, on the other hand, haven't watched The Mind Robber for a while. It's been a good couple of weeks, I should think. So I hope I don't repeat myself as we go once more into the land of fiction in the company of David J Howe, one of the major figures in Doctor Who research from yesteryear. He's an expert on all sorts of different aspects of the history of Doctor Who, and particularly toys as well, which has never been an area of my particular interest. I'm much more about what went on screen and behind the scenes and in the development of the stories themselves. But David was there in the early years, showing what fans could do to chronicle and support and understand their programme. And it's been a great pleasure to get to know him over the years. I only really see him at conventions, or occasionally if I'm doing a thing with Fraser Hines, with whom he is great friends and has been a neighbour indeed. And they're thick as thieves. So where there is a Fraser, there is often a David, and what a joy it is to see both men, because I enjoy the company of both. So I'm very grateful that David has gone to the effort to put nice videos together for this, for his contribution, and to if he lends his name to any Doctor Who project, it adds to its lustre, if indeed this has any lustre at all. And if it has no lustre, well, it has some now, thanks to David. So let's see how lustrous we can get as we see what is going on in the land of make-believe. It really is, isn't it? Oh, if only I could break copyright music and I could have that song by those people. You know the one I mean. The land of fun in the sun, number one. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do. Oh, right. That my telly screen has just... it was on a screensaver on BritBox, and it's just as I started singing, it faded to black, as if to say, yeah, no, come on, you've been too long. Now I can't get it back. All right, here it is. So I won't be singing again. let's go to the land of make-believe, but without a musical accompaniment, as we watch part 4, episode 4 of The Mind Robber. And I am going to press play in 3, 2, 1. This is going to be a short episode again, isn't it? Because that's the case with The Mind Robber. Everything comes in a little bit short. So if this is an episode that has a short running time, I can't guarantee that. I might bang on way too much at the end. And it's always a dilemma, that, because you think, oh well, people get more value if the podcast is longer, not if it's longer because it's full of rubbish. So I have, if I do augment this with extra parlay, I hope it is of a reasonable and entertaining quality. It's episode 4. It's interesting. It says part 4 on BritBox. When we did Running Through Corridors, we deliberately called each episode either part 1, episode 1, or as in the case of the Ice Warriors, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then Lars, the publisher, didn't realise that and just universalised them all and changed them. And but this is episode, and it's 4 as in the number 4, not FOUR. And I'm sure there's something to be written on the differences between when it's episode, when it's part, when it's a numeral, when it's written. In fact, that's just given me idea for a very potentially very anal and tedious and boring, but you never know, it could throw up some interesting observations or even the odd joke or two, and sometimes that's all you can ask for. It's so yes, he's picked up the sword, which has come from nowhere, because they've given it this sort of extra dimension of going, well, if he does the obvious thing, which is to slay the monster, he becomes part of the fiction, and that is what the trap is. And that's quite a nice and abstract idea, and it's good. And that's actually an excellent shot of the Medusa in the mirror. And this is quite Reithian, isn't it? It's quite educational. I'd done the sort of the myths and legends at school, so this was all quite familiar. So actually, the Medusa wasn't quite how I'd imagined her, and I think I'd got a myths and legends book where she had the sort of snakes on her hair, but she had a more human face than that, and was more like a sort of screaming banshee type. But of course, it's a wonderful image. Those myths and legends have, the Cyclops, the one-eyed beast, and I remember seeing a wonderful picture of the Cyclops in a Monsters book I had. In fact, it's the Monsters book that I've just talked to Stephen Shapansky about at Radio Free Skaro, that had pictures from Doctor Who. It's called The A to Z of Monsters. It's nothing to do with the Mind Robber, so I won't go into much detail, but it did have a picture of the Cyclops, which is another sort of myths and legends creature. And there's all sorts of wonderful paintings and etchings of those sorts of creatures. So I'm surprised actually that, well, I suppose the Minotaur has been used in a sci-fi version, the Horns of Nimon, of course. But the myths and legends of various monstrous creatures that are could be great inspiration for Doctor Who. And I'm surprised the Medusa is really only manifested itself once, really. Because the Minotaur, of course, is also a version of in the God Complex. Now this is that's lovely. The sort of the sliding door, and the sort of the little hatch escapes, and I love that. Gulliver sort of is brave and decides that he's gonna protect. His instinct is to be protective of Jamie, which shows that Gulliver is, he's one of the sort of goody sidekicks in this, even though he's slightly detached and speaks in the third person occasionally and talks like the pages of a book. And also we've got that thing of that he can't see the white robots that Bernard Horsfall does very well. But Bernard Horsfall has a very benign quality about him, doesn't he? It's a lovely, sweet performance, and the first of his many forays into Doctor Who. And what a great servant he was to the show, and indeed to David Maloney, who casts him every time. Every time Bernard Horsfall is in Doctor Who, he is cast by David Maloney, and I believe he'd got his tickets for Gallifrey, hadn't he? I think he'd even changed his money for Gallifrey when he had he was a crofter working in the Isle of Skye. That's what he did to retire. His wife, actually, the actress Jean Jordan Rogers, has only recently passed away, but he was all set for Gallifrey when he passed away. Bernard Horsfall, a lovely actor. I never had the pleasure. Here is the carcass. I was talking to somebody recently about Christopher Robbie, because who this is, also known as the cyber leader in Revenge of the Cybermen. So he has a silly German accent in this, and in Revenge of the Cybermen, and it was darling Matt Evenden who said. So no, it wasn't. It might have actually been Pete McTighe, actually, who was saying. So is the Revenge Cyberman? Is he an American actor? I said no. He's putting on an accent because that's what he thinks sci-fi aliens should be. Is American. He is actually very. He talks like this, Christopher. He was a continuity announcer on Southern Television, and I've seen him do Shakespeare. He was the curant, the King Lear of Robert Stevens at the Royal Shakespeare Company when Stevens played King Lear. And in fact, Stevens was ill for Press Week, and so his understudy, Christopher Robbie, who was playing the one-scene curant, which isn't much of a part, was King Lear. And my girlfriend at the time saw him and said that he had tears in his eyes at the curtain call because he did a fantastic job. This is a very bad fight. Yeah, oh, that was very, very bad. Arranged by B.H. Barry, who also arranges the fights in Four to Doomsday. And so I would argue, does not Doctor Who is not the greatest showcase for the fight arranging skills of B.H. Barry, who is a very experienced and regarded fight director. But I would perhaps not have either of his Doctor Who's on my show reel. And poor old Wendy Padbury has to sort of do that thing where she's explaining how she's beating him because she's remembering these moves. So she's sort of saying what the moves are, which she's going to explain to Doctor Who now. Maybe she's not. But she has to do that whilst doing the sort of flicking him, and he has to then time his tumbles to the flicking that she does, and he doesn't. But yes, so Christopher Robbie had his moment playing King Lear for the Royal Shakespeare Company, and has also played the Carcass and the terrible cyber leader in Revenge of the Cybermen. It's an interesting life, the life of an actor. But Christopher himself, who is now a sort of bewhiskered, sort of Captain Burnseye, Uncle Albert type in aspect, is a lovely, lovely man, a very jolly fellow, a very actory actor, and whose company I very much like. But both of his Doctor Who performances are quite eccentric, I would say. But it's introduced another sort of level into the story, and it's sort of meant to be quite comedic anyway. The Carcass, this, with his fake rubbery muscle chest and all of that, and introduces a fictional character that the Doctor doesn't know, because the Doctor's sort of understanding of fiction is what actually any sort of schoolboy or girl of 1967, 68, what their understanding of literature would be. In the of course, they're not going to know anything from the future, because future great literature hasn't been invented yet. There's no characters from the Zadie Smith novel in this. I mean, I don't think there would be the equivalent anyway. But there's nobody from Harry Potter in this, which is, of course, if maybe it was made in 2068, 67, 68, it would be. So, or maybe not, but you get what I mean. There's it's the thing about Doctor Who travelling in the future and the past, of course, is that the future of the programme, the future when the programme is being made, can of course make a fool of the programme, because it can only predict the future. But if it continues to exist 20 years in the future, there will be future developments that, of course, it won't have been able to predict. And in this case, there would be future works of literature that, of course, can't be plundered by the programme because they haven't happened yet. The Master, of course, this has caused lots of confusion. the fact that the baddie is called the Master, but it's not actually the Master. It's not that long away from the Master appearing in Doctor Who and becoming the Master that we know and love to hate. I love it when Troughton is sort of gentle and sort of sweetly. It's sort of slightly patronising. He talks in a sort of childish manner, but it's so benign and so disarming and so sweet. He's like a sort of gentle uncle. Yeah, I love that. Good for you, Doctor Who. I love Patrick Troughton. He's such an interesting actor, and I love his sort of scruffy uncle aspect that he has. Ticker tape, we wouldn't have that now either. So it's unique, really, this, isn't it, in the history of Doctor Who, this story. And here we are in a sort of in a set that's a mixture of sort of sci-fi propery with the ticker tape machine, but it's also got that Zoe's going to be silly now, Zoe, that was silly, but it's also got the sliding door that Jamie hides away from, and you get the feeling that anything can happen in this world. You go out of one set and you end up in a completely different environment, and it's a place of falling through walls and into tunnels, and from futuristic sort of high-tech environments into older ones or fairy tale ones. And I like what it does with place. I think that's really, even though it does feel quite low budget, that kind of fits in with the world that we've been created, because it's a world made up of sort of fiction, and it could almost stand a sort of cross arch or a painted backdrop, because that would add to its fairy tale like qualities. And the fact that the world has been made out of sort of cheap fictional backdrops, it kind of all works. And the fact that you have this, we expect a set to have, through a door you could see what is behind the door, but here it actually just has a black drape, and that adds to the sort of mystery that they're walking from one environment and sort of almost really weirdly materialize into another, that the normal rules don't apply in this world, because it's one of it's counterfeit. It's a land of fiction, even in its sort of structure. So they've gone off one place, and the way that the camera starts close up on them and sort of pulls away, as if to say you've now sort of almost been transported by magic, into a different. They went through the door, but actually, then the new environment sort of materialised around them. I think that's very cleverly done with the way that Maloney shoots it, especially shooting through the door. So this is actually the first time we've seen the Master, and he, a bit like the Great Intelligence, he's been speaking in a sort of scary voice, but then when he's having discourse with them, he's now his old self. He's now the sort of genial schoolmasterish Emery Jonesian the guy that he is. He's not the spokesperson for the machine here, and it is a bit like the Great Intelligence, where the actor speaks in a different voice depending on whether he is under the thrall of the thing that is controlling him. Emrys Jones, see, that mistake is made. That mistake is even made on the credits, I think, of the Out of the Unknown reconstruction of the episode called Little Black Bag, which only half of exists, and the closing credits and the last shot don't exist. So they've sort of pieced them together, and I think when they remade the credits, they made the mistake of calling him Emrys James, who is the actor who plays Orcon in State of Decay, and not Emrys Jones, who is this actor, who was married to Anne Riddler, I mentioned before, who was in The Wheel in Space. So he has been on the set of Doctor Who not that long ago, and actually he's one of those actors that, looking at him here, he's not got an awful lot of time left. He dies, I think, in 1972. I think somewhere early, out when touring a play. I think he's playing Winston Churchill in Johannesburg, I think, and collapses and has a heart attack. And in fact, one of the newspaper reports I read said that they're looking to contact his family, and you think, what? So it's been run in the newspaper before his wife knows, because that's the way that information was disseminated in those days. Now, I always get distracted by Emrys Jones in this episode because he's got a bit of spittle in the corner of his mouth, which now remains with him for the rest of the show this week. I love his little fingerless mittens. Well, they're not mittens, are they? Mittens are ones where all the fingers are knitted together. His fingerless gloves, I like them. It gives him a sort of benign eccentricity. He's like a Jamie. I love the way that Fraser Hines sort of fronts out and goes, "Oh, we're listening to you," as they sort of shift away. It's a lovely little piece of acting that I love. Jamie and Zoe, I think they're great, and they're going to go and be pesky, which is great. But I love the way that Fraser does that. Sort of, oh yeah, I'm listening to you, I'm just going to shuffle off to this side. The master brain is not unlike the conscience of Marinus in aspect, is it? I love this. Again, the fact that these are sort of flats, and they're flats of sort of photographs of bookcases, again, doesn't really matter. It kind of adds to it. They are scenery, and that kind of works as going, they are a fictional representation of what they are, supposed to be. I think you could be wonderfully meta with this, and it really works. I do like the big sort of spinning brain computery thing there. I remember Doctor Who: A Celebration does an unusual thing in its write up of this story, going, one thing is left unresolved: who built the computer? And when you didn't have the stories to watch, it was like, oh, is that mentioned in the story? No, it was just the writer. It was just Jeremy Bentham. It was his concern about the story. But he doesn't do that in his write-ups for other stories, going, there were holes in the plot like this one. But that was obviously one that had bothered him to the extent that he put it in the write-up. And the write-up in Doctor Who: A Celebration was, just a brief summary of a plot and then a couple of little behind-the-scenes facts. But it was interesting that was the thing that was particularly troubling him. And so I remember, watching it going, oh, are they going to raise the thing of who built the computer? Oh no, it's just an element that was left hanging for Jeremy Bentham. And of course, Out of the Unknown, mentioned that Emrys Jones is in an episode of, also had the White Robot. So this is one that is quite closely related to that science fiction anthology series, which, if you've never seen, is definitely worth checking out for Doctor Who actors and Doctor Who directors, and looking at sci-fi that is perhaps sort of slightly more adult in intent, but actually sometimes seems a bit obscure and impenetrable, and Doctor Who is largely, I think, much more fun. It's because Doctor Who has to be accessible family tea time viewing, which means that it's always got sort of accessibility in its remit, and as I say, as I feel, always has a sort of a zest to it, and with this, is really playing with form and doing something very ambitious with a show that the previous year has been quite formulaic. Actually, still this production block, isn't it? Because this is the end of this production block. Patrick Troughton is knackered at this point, which is why these episodes are short, and they're still in the same production block as season 5. I think this is an absolutely glorious image. Jamie and Zoe trapped in the pages of a book. It's surreal, it's strange, it's haunting. It's a really brilliant abstract cliffhanger that is nonetheless a terrifying image. Never mind the Doctor's head being held underwater or a monster bursting through a door. The two companions trapped in the pages of a book. What a wonderful thing! What a great thing to do when you're going, well, let's do this story in the land of fiction. How can the threats manifest themselves? So we don't know really, and there's no way they can do what they've done with the previous episode endings, which is have them go, you're just a fictional character, I can overcome you in that way, which is what they've done to previous ones, and it was in danger of being a little bit repetitive. That sees, Jamie, and I remember reading about that in the Doctor Who magazine episode guide. It said, Jamie and Zoe are shut into the pages of a book, and thinking, oh God, that sounds really amazing, and imagining what it must have been like. And I have to say, that's one of the rare occasions where what I imagined was actually not unlike how it is realised, because it's a giant book and they're shut into the pages of it. It's a brilliant image. It's a brilliant idea. It's brilliantly realised. And I think might very well be my favourite thing of the episode. Let's think of some other things. I like the way that Gulliver decides to protect Jamie. I think that's sweet, and I think that adds a nice dimension to his character. I like the way that they're sort of magically transported. That the sets, have that slightly deliberately, or perhaps I'm being kind, but that slightly deliberately two-dimensional, hokey feel, and the simplicity of the black backdrops. Well, I'll tell you what it does. If it is done on the cheap, because they have no choice, it's a story and a conceit and an idea and a conception that makes a virtue of the cheapness with which this stuff will be done, and it really, really works. And I think Evan Hercules, the designer, does a wonderful job in making cheap sets become an advantage, or if not to become an advantage, to augment the story in the correct way, and the way that David Maloney shoots it. I thought it was so clever how he shut the door behind them and then pulled out from a close-up of their faces. So I like that idea that place is as strange and is as displaced as reality, that the rules of this land are not quite the same as the one that that the reality is in, which is the same as when you're reading a book. You do transport from place to place, and you do go out of one door and then enter through a completely different one. That's how it works. So I really like that aspect of it, which is slightly intangible and slightly strange. I like the fact that we see Emery's James, and again, having had Jones. I'm doing it. If this was an article and somebody had done that, I would be furious with them. And I've done it about a gazillion times. He's Jones the Master. And the fact that he's been this sort of cowled figure that we've only seen from the back, talking in this threatening computer way, and then when we see him, he's like, oh, hello, I'm a very benign sort of fellow with a sort of lisp, and the fact that I've got this lisp means that a little bit of spittle is going to form in the corner of my mouth, and I'm not going to notice, and the stage manager's not going to come up to me between scenes with a hanky. I thought Troughton would have used his pockets for him, dabbed him when they cut away to Jamie and Zoe or whatever. But that's one of the beautiful things of as live television. And, why wouldn't a man under the thrall of a supercomputer who's controlling a land of fiction, when he's chatting away, not realise that he's got spittle in his mouth? His flies might be undone as well. It's just we don't get a close-up of those. I look forward to the day when we have a Doctor Who villain whose flies are undone. No, I'm not sure I do. In fact, I think we can defer that and not have a flying low Doctor Who villain until I am no longer around to be disturbed by such things. But that would mean they're still making Doctor Who after I'm dead. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that. But then that means I'd witness the end of Doctor Who. Oh, what a dilemma. What would you rather, listener? Would you rather Doctor Who finished forever so that you were not denied the possibility of seeing an episode of Doctor Who that was brilliant that you didn't get to see because you died? Or would you want to see every single episode of Doctor Who, but that means therefore witness the end and the cessation of Doctor Who in production? That's a dilemma, isn't it? I think I'm quite selfish and go, no, I want to see all of Doctor Who, please. Because, imagine, Attack of the Wing-Wangs might be the best episode ever, but if it's shown the year after I'm dead, it may as well not exist. screw you lot. Anyway, should we not talk about my death? I brought it up, sorry. I hope I'm here for a long time yet. Well, I suppose, it's possible that this will be listened. Let's not. Why am I contemplating my mortality? I suppose that's better than contemplating whether I'm actually real or a work of fiction. Are we all workers of fiction? Do we just exist in the mind of somebody else? No, I think we're real. But I do love this whole idea of a land where fiction exists. It's so batshit. It's so off the wall. It's so crazy. It sort of shouldn't work, and it's almost quite twee in a way in some aspects of it. But it works because it's strange and it's weird and it commits itself to it. And I also think it's rather charming. So there's lots of ways that a story of this kind could not work, and I actually think it really does. But I think I have to choose as my favourite thing before I jump over to David. I have to choose that cliffhanger. I think I sometimes think it's a bit boring and obvious to choose a cliffhanger, because cliffhangers are obviously often designed to be the most memorable part of the episode, because they're the bit that make you want to come back next week, and so they have the advantage of not even having to progress plot or character, because they're a moment that by its very nature has to be shocking and has to be memorable and can be visual, but can sort of almost exist in a vacuum. And I know Jamie and Zoe have been fictionalized a bit for next week, but you could see it as just a sort of moment of jeopardy that has come out of nowhere. They go and escape, and it's like, well, yeah, it's because we need to get to a cliffhanger, and we'll have this bit and we'll resolve it fairly quickly next time. But it's such a good visual. It's such a bold idea. It's really, really well done. I actually think David Maloney fades to back a little bit too slowly. There's no sense of sort of crashing urgency about his cliffhangers in the Troughton era. It is like actually closing the chapter of a book, rather than sort of tearing you out, tearing you from the end of a paragraph. It's sort of like it has stopped and it has faded, and here is the music. Which I do think robs some of the cliffhangers of their sense of urgency. But in this case, again, it kind of works with the sort of fictional, we're closing the pages on this chapter. But that's me being generous, because I do think I do yearn for them to get a bit of a shift on when you're racing to the climax. But I suppose of all of his 3 stories in this season, the Crotons and the War Games, the Mind Robber is the one where it kind of gets away with it the most. But I do think the cliffhangers work better when they're not a sort of fade to black and a start, but rather when the credits and the music sort of crash into the end of the program itself. That I think makes for a more arresting cliffhanger. And yet I love this cliffhanger. For different reasons. So you can not necessarily approve of the way that something is done and prefer it to be generally done another way, and yet still go but within its own terms. This is a fine example, and I just do love that image. You could only really get away with that image in a story like this. It's a simple trick. Obviously, you don't see one side of the interior of the book, and that's where the actors can fit in. There's obviously a hole there in the pages, so they're not really being squashed, but it looks like they're being squashed. They act it very well. It's filmed from the correct angle. It's a nice prop. It's a nice set. It's a wonderful idea. It's a brilliant moment. It's a brilliant visual. My choice, and I do think it's sometimes cheating, choosing the cliffhanger, and I'm sorry about that, but it has to be my favourite thing. My choice of the cliffhanger to episode 4 of The Mind Robber, my choice of my favourite thing in episode 4 of The Mind Robber is the cliffhanger. Let's see what David J Howe chooses. Oh, he's wearing an army helmet, or is it with goggles? He's reading Mind Game by David J Howe, so I'm going to allow him to plug that by describing it. This is the alt text, and he's by a bookcase with looks like a couple of awards, a few awards. So well done, David, for those awards and a medal and lots of books. And the book of Mind Game by David J Howe in reading it, does that mean it becomes part of the fiction? Let's see what he chooses as his thing for episode 4.
Episode 4 of The Mind Robber, and the best thing about this episode is that Zoe has this incredible fight with a carcass. Now, the carcass is this superhero from the year 2000, and he's like about 6 foot tall, more than that, played by Christopher Robbie, great guy, muscles everywhere. And little Zoe, who's like 4 foot nothing if she's a day, she manages to throw him all over the set and she beats him up. It's absolutely brilliant. Genius piece of direction. Really nicely done. Absolutely love it. It's a really nice little sequence in that episode. So that's my favourite bit of episode 4.
Now that's interesting, because I have learned a lesson there, because as soon as he said that, it made me think very fondly of that fight, because of course Zoe is diminutive, the carcass is very tall. I'd got my eyes so much on, and I remember being really almost embarrassed by it when I watched this when I was much younger. I wasn't embarrassed by it this time, but I did acknowledge it's not the best fight in the world. It's not particularly well staged, and that sort of made me not enjoy that bit and not really enjoy the carcass even though he's supposed to be quite silly and absurd. He's got a ridiculous German accent, but actually seeing it now through David's eyes, or having it explained by David, of course it's fun. It's a wheeze. Lighten up, Toby. And actually the fact that it's not very well done doesn't really matter and kind of adds to its charm. Now, I sometimes reject that. I don't go, I'm not one of those, Doctor Who's so naff it's good. I think Doctor Who's generally good because it's good, but actually within the dynamic of what they're trying to achieve within the scene, that's, the fact that it's a bit naff is not taking anything away from the program makers there, because it sort of tonally fits in with what they're trying to achieve, which is that the carcass is a bit stupid, and there's this big difference between the height and his, and isn't it her height and his, and isn't it witty that the small character defeats the big tall strapping character and does so in a way that's rather silly and rather fun, and that takes the scene from being, as it had been in younger me's eyes, of being a bit clunky and a bit embarrassing, something to be slightly ashamed of, into being rather a fun wheeze that's rather charmingly done and makes a virtues of even the bits that it doesn't quite get right. But it is a great idea of having Zoe, and I like the fact that Zoe continually sort of undermines what we expect her to do. She's continually, as the companion figure, actually smarter than the Doctor. She there, physically she should be, overcome, looking at the two of them, by the carcass, but actually has the smarts to outwit him because she knows these clever moves. It does make up for the fact that she rather stupidly walks through the alarm later, which is not her finest hour. But I do like Zoe, and I do like it when they play with what the conception of what the companion should be. And she manages to be sort of game and fun and slightly annoying at the same time, and you actually quite enjoy the fact that she's quite annoying, because that's sort of deliberate. It's not that she's being annoying without meaning to be. They absolutely know that she's quite irritating, and that's quite fun, unlike some characters who are irritating and they don't mean them to be. I think sometimes when they try and make Adric witty or charming, or mixing things up a bit, he's actually just a bit annoying, and they've not quite understood what the signal they're sending out is not the one that is being received, shall we say. Whereas with Zoe, it's all entirely deliberate. So that's a good choice, David, and one that I wouldn't have made in a million years, but as soon as you started making it made absolute sense to me, and it's made me reframe my appreciation of a particular sequence that, as I say, in the past has caused me great embarrassment, and now I see it for what it was intended to be, and not for what my teenage self wanted it to be, which was everything to be terribly serious all the time. And it is quite nice getting older and going, actually some things it's fine if they're not serious. It's absolutely fine not to be serious. Lighten up, younger Toby. Serious does not always mean good. So I don't get the point for that. But it's so long ago, I don't even remember how I'm doing with the points. I'm assuming I'm doing really, really badly. But, I'm not going to join in with what the points are, because otherwise that might make me actually become a podcast instead of a real person. Isn't that how it works? So anyway, that was fun to do. I enjoyed revisiting the story that's going at a lick of a pace and is disorienting and charming and winning and inventive and strange and not like any other Doctor Who story. And yet it's an experiment that is pulled off. I think there's no compromise really with. Sometimes Doctor Who pushes the boat out and you go, well, it's only a sort of qualified success. I think the Mind Robber succeeds, on its own terms very, very strongly, and I'm enjoying watching it, and I hope you're enjoying listening to it. But we're going to close the pages of this particular book, so try not to get trapped on your way out, and I will speak to you next time. Ta-ta. Well, thank you ever so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke, and my special guest, David J Howe. He's on Twitter, or is it X? Who knows what it'll be when you're listening to this, at David J Howe1, and his website is howswho.co.uk. I'm very grateful to David. He's a lovely fella. And I'm also grateful to the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Ben Cook, Martin Cook, Matt Corner, Leslie Coots, Ben Cowdell, Philip Craggs, Oliver Crocker, Sarah Krotzer, David Crew, Steve Cunniff, Dave Curran, Simon Curtis, Paul Philip Dahlgren, Matt Dale, Rob Dawson, Chris Davis, Hugh Davis, Robert Davis, Shanti Day, Ian Dean, Tim Dickinson, Sean Ditchfield, Drew, Dr. Delta, Jeff Edwards, Andrew Egan, Fleet Boy, Mark Findlay Smith, Chris Bone, Nev Fountain, and David Gillespie Pratt. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. So, would you like your name read out on the credits? That is just one of the many joys of being a patron of Toby Hadoke's Time Travels, that this Happy Times and Places is part of. Well, I suppose not just Toby Hadoke's Time Travels, it's other stuff that I do goes on there as well. In fact, recently I've been doing lots of exclusive patron podcast sort of stuff, emergency questions and monthly AMAs. It's partially because I haven't had access to my proper recording equipment and have been having to hastily improvise. So, it might not all be to your taste, but there's definitely still 3 releases per week. It's not the best advert, is it? Might not be what you want. It's not all this. It's not all podcasts. It's there's other stuff as well, but it's all Doctor Who related, except for occasionally when I do a bit of deep diving into Quatermass. But that is something that I have got a lot of information about, so I share it, but I try to keep it interesting. And as I say, you get 3 releases per week: a Monday, a Wednesday, and a Friday, usually a podcast, but sometimes something slightly different. And that doesn't include the Tuesdays, which are pictures of my dog, which I throw in for absolutely free. But a lot of people like the best of all things. So yeah, there's a lot going on, and you can interact, and there's chat, and so it's a sort of place to hang out and I think some of the stuff I put out makes people say, yeah, but I think this, and then somebody else will come and go, I think that, or I might say, I don't know about that, and somebody go, well, I do, I know that because of that. And so it's sort of like a Doctor Who forum, except without all the horrid bits. And I know who everyone is. No, you can't hide behind a pseudonym. That's patreon.com/Toby Hadoke, where, as I say, you get 3 releases at least per week. You're 6 months ahead with Happy Times and Places, and a month or a couple of months ahead with Indefinable Magic and Too Much Information, that at the time of recording I've fallen a little bit behind with. Sorry, fans of that particular podcast, but I would rather spend the time getting it right. And the latest ones have been delayed because I thought I was going to actually be able to interview 1 or 2 people from the production I'm covering, and it dragged on. And now I'm actually going, well, I didn't do that with some of the other ones, and they were absolutely fine. So it's mad to leave them hanging because it's not actually an interview podcast. So anyway, I am aware that Too Much Information has had too much hanging about in its gestation and realization, and I've taken steps to speed up the release schedule of those, because I know that those of you who like them particularly like them, and perhaps think there's plenty of Doctor Who commentaries out there I like the one that collates all that info. They do take longer to do, and I do want to do them properly, but I have taken my eye off the ball a bit, but that's because of personal stuff, and I have to earn a living and all those other bits and bobs. But if you have been wondering where they are, I'm stepping up the gas, so there's not too much revving at the moment. It's just the right amount to get me back on track, and I'm looking at ways of increasing the release rate. But whatever happens, the patrons will get those first and quicker. And all they do for that is pay £3 per month. It actually works out at about £2.70 per month if you pay for a year in advance, because you get a 10% discount on a yearly subscription, and that's no matter what tier you're on. £3 is the lowest tier. It goes right up to £1 million. I mean, it doesn't, but I mean, don't let that stop you. If you want to give me £1 million, you can. And that's at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. Monthly AMAs, advanced releases, bonus releases, pictures of my dog, all sorts of other stuff. But if you can't or don't want to do that, to tie yourself into a monthly subscription or an obligation, you can go to ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke if you would like to support these endeavours in a different way by just giving the odd donation if you particularly like an edition, or you've had a good week, or I sound particularly needy or hungry or in need of a cyber coffee, because it's at ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke. It's a way of sort of tipping a creative that you enjoy in the form of a metaphor that is actually money. But it seems nicer to ask for a metaphor than for money, doesn't it? Seems slightly less grubby. Hooray for metaphors. But look, money is quite grubby, and money is in short supply at the moment. And I know that, nobody has spare cash to be flinging around for stuff that is actually free if you want it to be, which is what podcasts are and how we're used to consuming our stuff these days. And that is fair enough. I am grateful to you for listening. But if you like it, it's a jungle out there and it's really hard work, and people are always quick to give negative feedback and less keen to give positive feedback in these days of the internet. So if you have positive feedback, please go to iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, and even cyberspace, Twitter, Facebook, everywhere you can, and say nice things about these podcasts, because that helps to drive people towards them, particularly on iTunes. If you give a 5-star rating and a few lines of review, that really tickles the algorithms and makes the podcast more visible. The more visible it is, the more people listen. The more people listen, the more it justifies me being up at 12 minutes past 1, which is the only time I can do stuff in this house that has way too much traffic going through it at the moment. Wish somebody had shut me in the pages of a book, and justify doing this. And I mean, I'm not only staying up late and advisedly, but also shouting into the ether where no one will listen. But there are listeners out there, and you're valued, and I'm grateful to you. But if there's one thing that you can do that only costs you a little bit of your time, it's just to help to improve, get the word out there, and also do word of mouth too. Tell your friends, but particularly your friends who you converse with in cyberspace. And if you can do it in the form of a positive review and a star rating as well, that is even better. Talking of cyberspace, I hang about there on Twitter at Toby Hadoke, Hadoke, on Twitter again in a different form at Hadoke Podcasts. That's for these particular podcasts, and I don't use it that stream to advertise things like my comedy club, Excess Malarkey, which if you are interested in, it's at Excess Malarkey on Twitter, and it's every Tuesday in Manchester, and we have some fantastic acts on, and occasionally some people from that there Doctor Who. I mean, Suze Kempner off of Doomsday has played there in the past 18 months or so, and we've also had visits from everyone from Tylos from Full Circle. I mean, he hasn't played there in a while. He's a mate of mine though, Bernard. To Banto, the DVD store owner from Blink. I'm sure some other. I'm sure, and when he was on, his friend, the Doctor who gets his brains sucked out by the Daleks in Doomsday, Raji James, they were both in the club at the same time. It was like a Doctor Who overload. In fact, in the audience, we've had all sorts of Doctor Who people. Tom Goodman Hill from the Unicorn in the Wasp. Loads of people. Colin Proctor from The Long Game and Victory of the Daleks. Peter Kay, of course, has been on the stage at XS Malarkey. It's had a little bit of a Doctor. Oh, David Bradley was in the audience once, actually. The first Doctor himself. So there's been, yes, on and off stage, there's been lots of Doctor Who-y stuff. But, I hope if you're interested in the comedy club, it's more for the brilliant comedy that goes on there every week, not because there might occasionally be somebody from Doctor Who on the stage or in the audience. But I started thinking about those, so then went off on a tangent. But my comedy club is XS Malarkey. I'm on cyberspace. I'm also trying to make a virtue of being on Instagram, where I'm at Toby.Hadoke, where I've learnt to do reels. And I do reels about covering what went on at the comedy club last time and what is happening next time. It's every Tuesday, remember, and the last Sunday of every month. Too, I do a night called Testing, where established acts try out new material. And I've got all sorts of famous people off the telly there, including Sarah Millican and Colin Holt and Justin Morehouse and more famous people coming up. That's on Instagram. I do these reels, and I'm getting quite good at them. Actually, I'm a dab hand with a change of filter and an exciting cut, and I make them all brief because nobody will consume anything longer than a minute here. So 50 minutes and 10 seconds of this podcast have been surplus to requirements. But I'm trying to build up the Instagram thing by getting good at it. So go there and follow my Instagram at Toby.Hadoke. That would be marvellous, because all the cool kids in the entertainment industry have thousands of Instagram followers, and I don't. And I think me not being a cool kid in the realms of Instagram is an oversight on the part of the cool ombuds people of cool, and I would like those ombuds people to pass me fit for coolness. So go to Instagram too. Now then, I think there might have been a slight rumble throughout some of the recording of my track for this episode, and it's because I'd experimented with... Because basically I've got a slightly new setup, and my movable desk on wheels that normally tucks under the sofa and enables me to record into the microphone now doesn't tuck under the sofa anymore. So I'd laid it beside the sofa, and I was crooking my back and crooking my neck, and it wasn't quite working. So then I put the microphone and its surrounding stuff on a sort of tray that went on my knees, and that was much more comfortable. But I think every time I moved or rocked, I think the mic might have picked it up. So that will be an experiment I will not repeat. This will always be the slightly rumbly episode of Happy Times and Places. So apologies if the quality, if you couldn't quite put your finger on what was wrong with it. I think there's a slight permanent sort of rumble from the non-solid and slightly moving nature of the surface that the microphone was sitting on, because that surface was actually on my knee, and human beings don't keep still, and every time I vaguely moved, I think it sent a little bit of reverberation up the microphone. So apologies for that, but I don't mind having the odd episode that's slightly different. It's all part of the fun, isn't it? I'd love to be able to record these under 100% professional circumstances, but I can't unless anybody wants to make an actual proper program of a Doctor Who commentary podcast, in which case, you can bring me to a studio and I can do it properly. As it is, it's a bit sort of thrown together, but isn't that part of its charm? He says, trying to turn something that wasn't very good into something as a sort of deliberate a sort of evocation of its soul. It's almost a bit like the sets in The Mind Robber. They weren't necessarily supposed to be like that, but the fact that they are the key to what kind of works about it. That's be very much intellectualizing slightly poorer technical quality than is usual. If you'd picked up on that, I might have got away with it if I hadn't flagged it up. Sometimes, you see, counterintuitively, if you're in the land of the mind robber, saying things out loud and pointing them out isn't always the best thing to do. Sometimes it's just the best to ignore things and hope they go away. That's how I've lived most of my life. Anyway, I better be careful before you start ignoring me and going away, because I rabbit on too much. So I will bring an end to that.